My name is Ruff Lott III, and I'm very excited here to stand before you and share my journey as far as what restorative practices has done for me as an educator. Like she mentioned, I have 9 years of experience in both elementary school and middle school, 4 years as an administrator, and 5 years as a classroom practitioner in both 4th grade and 5th grade, and as well as I taught 6th grade math for a year. In 2012, I was blessed with the opportunity to serve as assistant principal at Tafoya Middle School in the SAISD. And I was really excited about leaving the classroom and moving over into administration. And I thought it would be seamless, right? I did a very good job with my students in the classroom. I didn't do a good job with that speaker. I did a very good job with my students in the classroom building relationships. And I thought it was going to be an easy transition. Is that all right if I don't use this? Can I just blast it out? Is that all right? Let me turn this off. Is that a little better? Can you still hear me? Sounds like I was in like a Folgers coffee can a minute ago anyhow. So, like I was saying, I was given the opportunity to join the Tafoya staff as assistant principal. And so I really didn't know what that meant. I showed up to the campus, started doing my work, and then I quickly realized that the transition from the classroom to an administrator wasn't going to be as easy as I thought it was going to be. Number one, I was 28 years old. Right? Everybody I was dealing with was older than I. Some of the people on my campus had more years of service than I did years alive. So you can imagine how that was going to go over, right? And so as I began this journey as assistant principal, I realized that I wasn't any longer really serving the students like I was in my classroom. See, my classroom was all about the kids, right? I was teaching them, I was mentoring them, I was doing all these things for them. But when I stepped out, I realized that I started to work for the adults. And as an administrator, right, by default, I was given the hat of the disciplinarian. And what that meant to me, I wasn't all the way sure, but I knew that to be good at my job, I had to support my teachers one way or the other. And so a lot of that time, I had to support my teacher on the back of what happens with my child, with my student, right? And so I wasn't able to really build the relationships like I had done in my classroom with my kiddos because I was too busy trying to play mediator between the adult and between the child. And that's a tough spot for somebody to come into, not really understanding the whole picture. And so I tell you all that to say this. I really feel that as an administrator, we have the power, right, to really look at mindsets and really change the way people think about certain things. And so, like I said, I had this opportunity, and I really wasn't liking who I was becoming. I was upset. I just didn't like who I was as a person anymore. I didn't feel like I was educating kids like I wanted to educate students. And so, kind of by chance, and the way the stars align, right, it just so happened at the end of that school year, because of budget constraints, my position was being cut. So let's add insult to the fire, right? Now I didn't really know what I was going to do. Was I going to be out of a job? What was going to happen? And so add insult to fire. And so I was sitting with one of my mentors, and she was like, I was telling her what was happening, and I was like, I don't even know if I really want to do this administrative thing. I don't feel like I can get to the kids, And so she says, why don't you contact Phillip Carney at Ed White Middle School? And I was like, who's Phillip Carney? And so she started telling me a little bit about Phillip Carney. And so as a good mentee would, I contacted Phillip Carney. I said, hey, tell me a little bit about this restorative discipline thing that you got going on your campus. And so I set up a meeting with Phil, and we sat down, we started having the conversations. I expressed to him where I was at, right? Where I was at in my career, what I was thinking. He was like, you know what, I think you would be the perfect fit for who we're looking for. Make sense? And so a couple of conversations later, some paperwork filled out, and voila, I was the new 6th grade assistant principal at Ed White Middle School. And I was really excited to do that. However, I didn't quite understand what it was I was getting into. Now, Ed White was in its own form of transformation, right? For 2 reasons, academically and behaviorally. See, the year prior to the pilot of Restorative Discipline starting at Ed White campus, Ed White had experienced 1,149 instances of suspension or expulsion or some side of exclusionary practices on that campus in one school year with a campus of 960 students. See, what had happened was they said that Mr. Carney had to come in and clean that school up, and by God, they did. They came in and they did what was efficient, and they built a hell of a diagram that says, if you do this in the class, if you do these things, you are going to go out. And so that's how they did it. And they did, and they did, and they did. And so after that first year, they had to look at it, and they were saying, what we're doing simply isn't working. Because with 1,149 instances of suspension, right, you would think that if exclusionary practices was working at the school, you would think that Ed White would be the best behaved campus on the planet, right? Get out. That was the motto, get out. You can't act right in school, get out. You can't act right for the teacher, get out. And so exclusionary practices were the go-to thing. And so after that first year, they brainstormed, and after I got on board, we all sat and we talked, and we were like, look, this isn't working. We have to come up with an alternative approach. Now you can understand, right? If you're sending that many kids home to maintain order in a campus, you can imagine what that's doing academically. And so when I talked about transformation a second ago, Ed White, we didn't make state accountability. We weren't meeting federal accountability. We were a PEG campus. 50% of my kids read at a grade level or two behind. And so you can imagine with all those things, how was it that we were going to put everybody on board with one mission, and that was to get the kids to where they needed to be? How are we going to do that? And so that's kind of where restorative practices were born on the Ed White campus. And so today, what I'm going to do is through my story, through my testimony, and kind of what we were able to do with our kids, I'm going to take you for the next hour through what restorative practices are and kind of what the mindset shift is going to look like. And so here we go. So the foundation, we're going to be talking about the foundation. What is restorative discipline, and why is it that we need it? We'll be talking about and examining the differences between traditional consequences and restorative or discipline practices or restorative practices. We're going to be talking about the adult mindset. Now, the adult mindset is key. So let's just face it, people. The adults are the hardest people to convince. The kids love it. The kids will figure it out. The kids will work. They're adaptable, right? We're a little more rigid in what we do, okay? And so we're going to be talking about the adult mindset and how the adults have to really be on the forefront of this movement in order for it to work the way it's designed to work. And then we're going to be talking about the restorative practices and how they were to impact the campus and impact culture on that campus with some of the data that I'm going to share with you and through this story over the next hour. And so this is my man right here. A lot of times, and you notice, I tried to model this for you when I walked in, right? I was at the door, I shook some of you guys' hands, I welcomed you in, right? And so that was one of the things that we had to figure out from the get-go, right? When kids came to campus, we had to greet them. We had to be there for them, because a lot of the times we were the only positive adults they were going to see that day. And so when they came to campus, we had to greet them. We said hello to them. And so there's this whole thing about how we greet people, how we talk to people. And so we had to recognize that we had to do this. And so sometimes we find ourselves as adults, especially in schools or maybe in the work that you guys are doing, you end up standing like this a lot. And you can imagine when we wrote this out to our teachers, they were looking at us like, really? This is what we're really going to do? And we were like, yeah. And so do me a favor. If you have a pen in your hand, if you have something that you're writing with, if you could just free your hands for a second. And what I want you to do is I want you to get comfortable, right? I want you to cross your arms like the gentleman on the screen here. Just sit back and kind of cross your arms and get comfortable. You know, get that that look. Now I want you to relax. Then what I want you to do is I want you to cross your arms the opposite way. Ooh, it's always one. She was like, right? Go ahead and uncross your arms. Now do me a favor, cross your arms just one more time. Now looking around the room, right, and it doesn't matter where I go and who I do this, we all went back, right, to crossing our arms the way we originally crossed our arms. Makes sense, right? And so research says that it takes 21 days to break a habit. But this little exercise goes in to show how ingrained we are in what we do. See, because when I asked you, right, when I asked you to switch and turn, how did that feel for you? How did it feel?
What is that? What does that look like?
Yeah, what does that look like, right? She said weird, uncomfortable, right? It was an odd feeling. It was not the norm. It isn't what I do, right? And so when we started talking about attacking the mindset, right, that's what it feels. And to our educators, when we started telling them that we were going to have a different approach, we were going to have to do things differently, they were looking at it like, but that's uncomfortable for me. I don't like that. And what is it going to look like? And so they had all these reasons as to why we couldn't change. And so I do that to say for the next 45, 50 minutes now, right? Just open your mind, open your hearts for a second as I try to explain some things and try to paint a picture, right? I'm going to give you just a snippet here, but as I try to paint a picture of how we use restorative practices in our campus to get the results that we needed to get. And so what exactly is RD? And so when it came down to figuring out how we were going to do this, right, we partnered with the University of Texas at Austin. And we partnered specifically with the Institute of Restorative Justice and Dialogue, which was headed by Dr. Marilyn Armour. And so the reason why we did that was they had a background, right, in restorative justice, right? Because restorative justice was happening in the court system. It was happening with cases, and people were mediating situations, and they were doing that in the criminal side of things, okay? And so she was interested in bringing some of those principles and those practices into schools, okay? And we just so happened to have a school. So we were like, all right, so if we kind of partner with you, maybe you can show us some things, we can kind of show you some things, and together we might be able to pull off this pilot that we did, all right? And so when I say pilot, what we did is we started in one grade level only, and that was 6th grade, okay? And every year after that, it was a 3-year experiment, right? Pilot was 3 years, and so every year we looped up with our students, and so now the first year was 6th grade only, then we went 6, 7, and then at the end we were a whole school model, right? 6, 7, 8. So understand that this wasn't a quick approach, right? It was a 3-year scenario. And so after they started working with us, she came up with this definition of what exactly RD is. And she says, restorative discipline is a relational approach to building social climate and addressing student behavior that fosters belonging over exclusion, social engagement over control, and meaningful accountability over punishment. Now, if I ask you real quick, what words stand out to you? Now, hint, right? I made them yellow. Relational, right? Meaningful accountability. And what does meaningful accountability look like? I don't know. Depends on the situation, right? What about belonging? Right? Belonging over exclusion. And to me, belonging was the key piece. See, because when I was telling you my story about what I was doing at Tafoya, you see, I was excluding kids. I wasn't making them feel like they belonged. And I'll talk a little bit later about how Maslow's, right, because I'm going to start speaking y'all's language a little bit, right? We'll talk about how Maslow's plays into that, okay? And so Dr. Armour, she came up with this, and so we kind of been living by that definition. And so this is a slide that I love the most. And this is a slide that we added when we started talking about this. And when we take this to different school districts across the state of Texas and we're trying to teach them how to implement practices, we really hedge in on what RD is not. Because a lot of times, the misconceptions have already killed the process prior to it coming. You follow me? And so what RD is not, it is not the silver bullet, okay? You're not going to do this and all of a sudden every child on a campus or every child that you work with or every child that has a problem is going to be fixed. It's not going to happen, right? It is not a silver bullet. So once we put that out there and people start thinking, okay, so it's not a silver bullet, right? It's not a quick fix. It's not something that's going to happen right away. It's a process. It takes time. So that's what goes on to my next thing, right? It's not something that you do to them. It's something that you do with them. See, as an administrator on a traditional campus who was a disciplinarian, all I did were things to kids, right? I made a lot of decisions for kids. I didn't make decisions with kids. And so therefore, they weren't really learning from the consequences and punishments and things that I was giving them. I was just sending them on their way, processing the paperwork, sending them and hoping that my teacher was excited about what I did, right? Because let's just face it, right? If I was working with the student and the teacher didn't agree to what I did with them, then they were what? They're disappointed now. And so I talk about living in a glass house, and that's how it felt when I was an administrator because I was trying to help the student, but the teacher didn't necessarily want me to help the student. They just wanted something done. And so you start seeing how this mindset starts to conflict with restorative practices. I talk about it being a process, not a program, right? This isn't a weight loss program. This isn't 30 kids in 30 days. It's not that kind of situation, right? It's a process. And so we have to take it through the process, which means that you have to practice this process. You have to experience this process. You have to go through it. If you come out with the mindset that it's a program, right? I get a boxed approach. I put things together. I'm going to do A, I'm going to do B, I'm going to do C, and then everything should work out fine. You're going to be disappointed. And that's how I look at it, right? If you're working with campuses who are trying to implement restorative practices and they're doing those kinds of things, you're going to see that in isolation, it's going to hurt the process because they're going to treat it as a program. They're going to do it for a few days or a few weeks, and they're going to look back and they're going to say, well, that program doesn't work. Follow me?